we're going to break down one of the most subtle and yet most powerful social dynamics you will ever come across. It's called the perceived authority hack, and it really gets to the core of why we follow the leader, even when we shouldn't.
You know, the most striking truth about this hack is that your brain is literally hardwired to obey the costume of power, even when the person wearing it has zero actual right to lead you. We like to think we follow people because they're qualified, right? But in high-pressure situations, simple signals, things like fancy jargon, the right clothes, or just unwavering confidence are used to completely bypass your common sense. And this isn't some flaw in your character, it's actually a feature of your brain's wiring. It's a short.
So this really is the big question, isn't it? Why is it that when someone just acts like they belong in charge, we automatically feel like we belong in line? This is the central paradox of perceived authority. It's that exact moment when your own natural respect for order gets twisted and used as the very mechanism for your own compliance. It's this tiny, almost invisible shift from being a peer to being a follower. And believe me, it happens way more often than any of us realize.
So here's our game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to map out the system itself, what we're calling the architecture of obedience. Then we'll break down the very specific 3-step pattern that's used to pull it off. After that, we'll dig into the psychology of why it works so well on us. And most importantly, we're going to get practical and talk about building your defenses and ultimately reclaiming your own intellectual sovereignty.
Okay, so let's start by really defining the system. What is actually going on inside our heads when we're faced with this so-called costume of power?
Well, there's a scientific name for this whole thing. It's called symbolic dominance. And it's this fascinating cognitive shift where our brain just takes a shortcut. Instead of carefully analyzing substance, we just react to symbols. You see this everywhere, from the super expensive high-ticket coaching schemes and the rise of pseudo-gurus to even corporate settings where someone grabs power just through sheer force of personality, not because they've actually proven they know what they're doing.
And what's so important to understand is the difference here. On one side, you have credentialed competence. That's real authority, earned through skill backed by data. But on the other side, you've got hierarchy mimicry, and that is the core of the hack. The person isn't actually demonstrating competence, they're just imitating the signals of it. They're playing a role, and our brain is basically pre-programmed to respect that role without ever asking to see the script. This whole thing works because it triggers 2 key belief patterns in our minds. First, there's the symbolic hook. We see the suit. We hear the jargon, and our brain just leaps to the conclusion, oh, this person must know their stuff. It's an automatic, almost unconscious thing. And that leads right into the second pattern, instructional inevitability. And this is that awful sinking feeling in your gut that if you dare to ask a question, you're going to look dumb, you'll mess up the group's vibe, or you'll just make some kind of social blunder. It just feels so much easier and safer to just nod and go along with it.
And this is where things get a little dangerous over the long run. This dynamic actually erodes our ability to think critically. We shift from a mode of collaborative inquiry, where a group works together to find the best possible answer, to a state of vertical compliance, where everyone just looks to the person at the top and follows their lead. The goal isn't accuracy anymore, it's just cooperation with whoever seems to be in charge.
Now, if you're in a situation like this for a long time, it can lead to a really damaging effect that people report as status atrophy. Just think about that for a minute. You can literally start to lose confidence in your own expertise. Your own sense of competence just shrinks. You might even find yourself constantly checking in with this authority figure for things you absolutely know how to do. You start to feel, well, smaller in their presence, basically handing over your own judgment because their aura just feels more powerful than your actual knowledge.
Okay, so now that we get the underlying architecture, let's look at the how. What is the specific, systematic process that's used to manufacture this kind of obedience? It turns out there's a really clear and repeatable pattern. This process really breaks down into 3 distinct steps. It always starts with setting the stage. Then it moves to creating a linguistic barrier. And it all culminates in what we call cognitive deference. And make no mistake, this is not random. It's a sequence that is designed, step by step, to redirect your own internal reasoning.
So step 1 is all about the environment. The controller will create a setting that just screams exclusive or high status. Think of a super fancy conference room, a private mastermind group, or maybe just a conversation that's packed with mentions of high-level people. This immediately primes you to feel like a guest, or maybe even a junior member of the group. People in these situations often say they feel lucky just to be in the room, which right away sets up a power imbalance.
Then comes step 2, the linguistic barrier. This is where the controller uses language not to make things clear, but to create distance. They'll start throwing around really complex terminology, dense industry jargon, or just a never-ending stream of acronyms. The point here isn't to communicate, it's to create a knowledge gap. It's designed to make you feel confused and a little bit intellectually inferior, reinforcing this idea that they know something really important that you just don't.
And right here is where the trap snaps shut. Cognitive deference. At the exact moment you're feeling a little intimidated by the stage and confused by all the jargon, a directive is given, an instruction. And because your brain is biologically wired to seek social harmony and to look for a leader when you feel uncertain, you just comply. It's the path of least resistance. The crucial thing to see is that this sequence is completely intentional. The costume triggers your respect, and that respect is then used to trigger your compliance.
So we've covered the what and the how, but why is this hack just so incredibly effective? I mean, why do we fall for it? To really get that, we have to look at the deep psychological motivations for both the person using the hack and, well, the person it's being used on.
This slide just lays out that push and pull dynamic perfectly. The controller's goal is something called zero resistance influence. They want to get to a point where their instructions are followed without question, without any need for proof. On our side, our vulnerability is often this really deep human need for social inclusion. We are social animals after all, and sometimes that desire to look like we're in the know or part of the in-group can actually be stronger than our need to be factually correct. We'd rather fit in than risk being the one person who's right.
And all of this gets amplified by this really powerful mental shortcut we all have called prestige bias. It's basically an evolutionary leftover, a piece of our old mental software. Our brains have this biological tendency to automatically give more weight and credibility to the opinions of people who just seem to have higher status. It was probably a really useful survival trait way back when, but in our modern world, it's a vulnerability that's just waiting to be exploited.
Okay, I know this has all been a little heavy, but here's the good news. Just understanding how this works is the biggest step towards defending against it. So now we get to the most important part of this whole explainer, how to build your defenses and start reclaiming your own judgment.
Your number one defense mechanism is a mental tool called the substance versus signal audit. It's so simple, but it is incredibly powerful. In any interaction where you start to feel that pull, you just consciously ask yourself this question. Am I getting actionable data here, or am I just getting status-based vocabulary? Let me say that again. Are they giving you facts, evidence, and clear logic, or are they just feeding you buzzwords, jargon, and a lot of impressive sounding but totally empty phrases?
And let's be absolutely crystal clear here. The goal is not to become some cynical person who distrusts everyone. Not at all. The goal is simply to recognize when status is being used as a tactic. By just labeling the strategy in your head, they're using a signal here. You separate it from the person, and that allows you to analyze what they're actually saying way more objectively.
This leads us to the next tool, which is a mindset shift called horizontal reset awareness. This one takes a little bit of conscious effort. The moment you feel that sense of deference creeping in, you have to intentionally reset the dynamic in your own mind. You start treating the expert as a peer, an equal, someone who has to logically earn your trust and your time, just like anybody else. This simple mental act completely neutralizes the power of symbolic dominance. And this is the mantra you've got to hold on to. Credentials are not a substitute for logic. Just because someone has a fancy title, an impressive degree, or a super confident delivery doesn't automatically mean their argument is sound. Your deference, your respect, that is a choice that you make. It's not a duty that you owe them. Just recognizing that simple fact is what breaks the entire cycle.
All right, we have dissected the architecture, the mechanism, the psychology, and the defense. So let's bring this all home and talk about what it really means to reclaim your own intellectual sovereignty.
You know, at the end of the day, understanding the perceived authority hack teaches us a massive lesson about what real leadership is. And this quote just reframes it perfectly. True leadership is a service that you offer to other people. It's about providing value and clarity and support. It is not a costume you wear to demand obedience. And that brings us to the most critical point, probably the single biggest takeaway from this entire explainer. The whole cycle breaks the moment you realize that true authority isn't something that's projected onto you. It is a role that you consciously and willingly grant to someone else based on evidence and trust. It is not a signal you are obligated to obey. Your mind is your own territory, and awareness is the fence that keeps you in charge of it. So the path forward from here is really clear. Ask the question even when it feels a little awkward. Demand the proof, not just the platitudes. And above all else, own your path.